Welcome, explorers. I am excited to announce that I will be doing an upload marathon this week due to my extended free time during spring break. This means I will be uploading an indeterminate number of videos each day because of my extra free time. This will be the first and only announcement of this. Today, dive into the thrilling TTP narration of Hunting with Predators by Banancake, a 25-part fan-made saga from the Nature of Predators series by Spacepaladin15 on r/HFY.
Memory transcription subject, Vikri, Venlil volunteer crewman of UNS Cardinal. Date, standardized human time, October 28, 2136, 11 days after the Battle of Earth. We walked in a single file line across the plains. I followed behind the towering form of Tenga while Reese followed behind me, Querec in tow. Grant marched in the rear, rifle slung over his shoulder, one round in the chamber. The hour we walked was utterly uneventful. Our surroundings were quiet, only occasionally disturbed by flocks of migrating birds. We'd watch as they swarmed about in the sky in hypnotic patterns, unhindered by the dangers lurking on the ground. What I wouldn't give to be up there with them. We steadily went down in elevation, heading west. The humans studied the ground around them, searching for signs of activity. So far, the snow had been undisturbed, save the line we were carving through the plateau. I wondered if everything living here simply fled. The sky wasn't as open as it was yesterday. Periodically, the sun would be dimmed by a passing cloud. From the hilltops, I could even see their colossal shadows moving over the flats. There was so much open ground, perfect for persistence predators. As we continued descending, golden grass started to stick up through the deep snow, blown about by the icy winds coming over the mountain behind us. I watched Tenga as he walked in front of me, planting the blunt end of his spear into the snow with each stride. His movements seemed heavy, not precise, and fluent like I was accustomed to seeing from humans. He stumbled a bit more than usual, even considering the snow and ice. He breathed through his mouth a lot, and I would occasionally hear him clear his throat with a short, raspy cough. Grant said the virus would take weeks to show, so I was worried the bacterial infection might be spreading. I couldn't see much of his forearm, but the skin in that area was still red and inflamed. Tenga shivered as another gust of frigid wind pelted us. He slipped and caught himself on his hands and knees. "Damn it," he grunted. A cloud of steam rose from his mouth. "We can rest a minute, Lieutenant," Grant said from behind. "Just a little further," he replied, breathing deeply. I walked up beside Tenga, tail drooping in the snow. "You're sick," I said plainly. The lieutenant looked up and wiped his nose with his healthy forearm before sitting on his knees. His face was pale. "I'm fine." His voice was coarse, damaged by the relentless winds. "No, you're not," I insisted. "Of course I'm not, Vic," he growled. I staggered backward, an old familiar panic pouring into my chest. Tenga realized he'd frightened me and held out a hand toward me as he took a deep breath. I'm sorry." He planted his gloved hands back in the snow as he stood up. "I know I'm not fine. I haven't been fine in weeks. But I have to see this through. I have to get all of you out of here, it's my duty." The ensuing silence was disturbed as Grant walked up to the lieutenant. "Then I'll take your bag." Tenga squinted at him. "What?" "You aren't well, and it's getting worse. If it's your duty to lead us, then it's mine to bear the load and let you lead, sir." Grant smirked. Reese mumbled under his breath behind us as he scanned the environment, "Who fucking raw." I approached the hungry predator. "Just until you catch your breath, Tenga." "No shame in it, Lieutenant," Querec added from inside the sling. His ears flicked as he gave Tenga a knowing look. Tenga looked around at us. He scoffed. "Ah, what the hell?" He slung his pack from over his shoulder and handed it to Grant, who threw it over his shoulders, facing the front rather than behind him. It was a lot of weight, but I doubted Tenga would let him carry it for long. The lieutenant helped Grant adjust the straps. "Don't ever pull that sir shit on me again, that's an order." "Yes, sir." Grant gave a sloppy salute. Tenga chuckled and continued leading the way. It was easy to forget that he was their superior officer and mine, for that matter. I felt that even if he wasn't, he had such a natural sense of leadership that we probably would have treated him the same either way. We crested the top of a hill a few minutes later and continued down, passing patches of dead grass and bushes as we marched. We began crossing through the flats below when Tenga spotted something. "There," he said, pointing to the right. The humans hurried over as I tailed behind. There were spots in the thin layer of snow where the ground was plainly visible. The snow was disturbed in general all around us. "Something was here," Reese said. Grant knelt down. "Something big." I walked up beside them. The dry spots were indeed big enough that the humans could easily fit within them. The grass beneath was matted down and wet. "Over here." I heard Tenga call. I didn't even notice him leave. We hurried over to where Tenga was kneeling. In front of him were rows and rows of small indentions in the snow. "Hoof prints." "Bison," Tenga said plainly, "and it hasn't been too long." If there was one benefit to all this snow, it was that tracking things was painfully easy. Although, I shuddered to think that the remaining wolves might be using that against us. "So there really is a herd out here," Reese said. Grant nodded. "Not a small one either. Look at all these tracks." All across the hillside, there were lines cut through the snow, moving the powder aside entirely in some areas. There were dozens, maybe even hundreds, of the huge herbivores here. All of them were big enough to crush a human, no doubt. Would they really try to hunt one? How would they do it without getting trampled? The humans looked at each other. They looked unsure but excited. Disturbingly so. A potential meal was finally close by. Tenga stood back up. "Let's go and visit our old friends." We followed the tracks for an hour. Tenga took his bag back from Reese, having recovered some strength. I was nervous. This could be it. This could be the answer to the question I'd struggled with since I met the humans. I might witness a human hunting for food firsthand. I looked back at Querec and Reese behind me. They'd been oddly quiet during the last hour. I saw Querec's head poking out of the sling, staring off at the horizon. He seemed nervous as well. Tenga crested the hill in front of me and stopped at its peak, looking down into the plains below. I watched as a breath escaped his mouth, shrouding his face in a cloud of vapor as his eyes scanned the sight in front of him. His mouth hung open slightly. We all stood next to him and paused to take in the view with him. All across the field below us, hundreds of huge, four-legged beasts wandered about. The tracks led straight to them. We found the bison. They were massive, bulky creatures with mighty horns and thick, shaggy hides. They huddled together in clusters, feeding on the grass piercing through the snow. I could even see steam rising from the backs of a few as their body heat scattered into the freezing air around them. We all stood atop the hill in silence for a moment. Reese stepped closer to us. "Have you ever seen such a sight in all your life?" He leaned forward slightly, placing a hand on his knee. Tenga closed his mouth before answering. "Never this many, they're incredible," he seemed struck. Was that admiration? Grant knelt down and peered through the scope of his rifle. "What's the play here, gentlemen? Do we go for one?" Tenga knelt beside him. "It's dangerous. If we make too much of a scene, we could start a stampede, and they'll run us into the ground. We'd need to single one out and take it down. These spears just aren't going to give us the option of a quick, quiet kill." "I've still got one shot, Lieutenant." "Yeah. It could come to that, but I figure we should at least try the spears. If there are stragglers around, we might just need to hold on to that round." The humans nodded. They were so strategic. I had difficulty imagining the Arxer displaying so much restraint in this situation. Tenga stood up. "We'll get a bit closer and watch for a while. If one separates from the herd, Grant and Reese will go. I'll stay back with you too," he gestured to Querec and me. Tenga turned to his human packmates. It's unlikely you'll be able to stop it from running once you attack, so if it comes to it, make damn sure the herd stampedes away from you. The predators nodded, and we descended down the hill. We set up and waited next to a lone tree on the flats, just under 100 meters from the herd. We made sure to stay out of sight and avoid making too much noise. The humans stalked the creatures as they grazed about, unaware that predators were lurking nearby. The whole situation was so alien to me. To be on the other side of an ambush. I felt so out of place. I observed the bison curiously while Querek sat bundled in a blanket beside me. It was difficult to understate just how gigantic they were. They stood taller than a human by several inches on all fours. The total length of their body must have been twice that. I watched as one wriggled about in the snow, covering itself in mud. For their size, they seemed oddly docile. Mostly, they just lumbered about, not paying particular mind to each other. Most of them were just lying down in the snow or eating grass. The most interesting thing I noticed was that all the bison I had seen were apparently female, aside from the young ones in the mix. We all waited and observed quietly. Grant had his rifle propped against the tree as he squinted through the sight. "I might have something here," he whispered. Reese leaned against the tree next to him. "Where at?" "Look there, to the right." A lone bison wandered a bit too far from the herd as it munched on the grass. It was the prime target. Part of me wanted to urge the oblivious creature to return to its herd before it was eaten. It didn't feel right to stand by and watch, knowing the humans were stalking it. However, a greater part of me wanted to see my friends make it out of this alive. Querek and I exchanged a nervous glance before we looked back at the humans. Reese took a deep, shaky breath. "All right. It's now or never." He let the breath go as he looked over at Grant. "Let's do this." Tenga stopped them before they left. "Take these with you." He handed them a pair of flare rods. "If it makes a run for it, you make damn sure that herd runs from you too." My heart began racing as I noticed something had changed in the humans' demeanor. They seemed terrified. Genuinely terrified. Their pupils were dilated, their breathing was rapid, and their anxiety was plain to see. They'd been through the most fierce battle the galaxy had seen in a long time. They survived an attempted eradication of their entire species. They stared a superior foe in the eye and didn't flinch. Yet, in the face of nature, with nothing but the strength and sharp minds it provided them, they were scared, just like any other animal. There was no heroic sacrifice to be made here, no greater cause to die for. No medals would be handed out at a lavish ceremony after this was said and done. All there was kill or be killed. Reese and Grant left their bags and outer layers of clothing and slowly slinked away toward the unsuspecting bison. It was incredible how much smaller they could make themselves. They moved with steady steps, spears held in a reverse grip, ready to throw. The closer they approached, the slower they stalked. They were careful to stay behind the bison, minimizing the chances of it spotting them before they were in range. As they cautiously moved closer, Tenga spoke. "You two are here because you want to accept us for what we are, right?" We nodded. Tenga sighed. "I've thought about it a lot, if we could be anything like the Arxer. I like to believe that there is some innate good in humans, but I also realize that they can be equal parts evil. Part of me believes that if we'd met you just a couple of centuries ago, things might not have been so friendly." He whittled at the tip of his spear with a bloody knife as he spoke. "I guess the difference between the Arxer and us is that, with some time, we prevailed against our nature. And it took a lot of bloodshed to do it. Brave humans fought and died for causes far beyond their instincts. They died so that we would never be like the Arxer." Tenga leaned back against the tree as we watched Grant and Reese close in. My eyes were glued to the scene. Tenga doffed his pack. "Maybe that's what it is to be a good predator. To look that part of your nature in the eye and say, I could be so much more." Grant stood up, and the bison began to turn toward him. The predator widened his stance and threw the spear precisely as he did when practicing with the ration box. The spear sailed through the air and embedded deep in the bison's side. Blood spilled from the wound as the beast turned toward them. Enraged, it charged forward, and I could hear Grant shout in the distance. "Oh shit!" Tenga propped up against the tree. Or, it could just mean getting squashed by an angry buffalo. That could also be the case. Grant and Reese dove out of the way, splitting off in opposite directions as the creature sailed between them. It grunted and bucked before it spun around and went after Grant, who was still on his back in the snow. Reese charged at the beast from the side and plunged his spear into the base of its neck, using it to leverage the bison's horns away from Grant, who narrowly avoided being trampled as he rolled out of the way. The creature threw Reese aside with frightening ease. The two ignited their flare rods and began barking and shouting at the creature. Finally, the bison had had enough and bolted back toward the herd. Suddenly Querec spoke up. "Tenga, behind us." We turned around to see four figures rapidly approaching in the distance. Fear began to burn in my chest as I recognized the pack of angry canids. The wolves were back. Had they been tracking us the whole time? I yelped as Tenga scooped us up and began running at full speed down the hill. He called to Grant and Reese. "The wolves are coming. Get after the herd." The two exchanged glances before running alongside Tenga, who passed me to Grant. I clung tight to his back as he began running. He was much quicker now that he was unhindered by his pack and thick clothing. The humans started yelling at the herd as they pursued the wounded bison. They waved their spears and flares around in the air, creating as much of a scene as possible. When the herd realized a group of crazed predators was coming, followed by another close behind, they promptly fled in the opposite direction. The stampede was on. The massive herbivores moved in one giant wave across the plain. The rumbling of their hooves rattled the still air. We had found ourselves between a fleeing mass of destruction and a pack of insane predators. I looked behind us to see that the wolves were gaining. They barked and gnashed their teeth as they pursued us. No doubt they could smell the wounds on both Tenga and Querec. They were determined to run us down. Apparently, they preferred alien cuisine to bison. "Grant!" I yelled. "I know! I know!" The predator let out a raspy shout as he picked up the pace. The chase continued down a gentle incline. The humans' boots tore the ground apart as their relentless charge continued. With each passing moment, I felt Grant's lungs drawing in the frigid air faster and faster. I could feel sweat begin to soak through his thin layer of clothing. Tenga and Reese kept pace beside us. Querec dangled over Tenga's shoulder as he ran. We caught up with the wounded bison, tailing just a few meters away from it. A line of blood followed behind it as well. Despite its wounds, it seemed to still be going strong, but its pace was slow. Grant's spear was still lodged in the beast's side as it lost more and more blood. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me!" Reese shouted beside me. I peeked past Grant's head and saw torrents of white foam splashing into the air as the bison plowed through a stream at full speed. It might have been the same one we were camped at just last night. This part of it, however, seemed much deeper. The giants barely kept their heads above water as they braved the rushing current. Several were swept downstream, but those that made it ran for the tree line on the other side. "We aren't making it through that," Grant announced. Tenga swiveled his head about as he looked for any options. He looked back over at us. "Let's climb back up the hill on the left side. Have that rifle ready." The humans clambered up the slope, using the few trees populating it to boost themselves forward. "Here's fine. Take the shot." "At the bison?" "Yes, at the bison. As soon as it's down, make a break for the carcass. Don't let that thing get to the stream." "Shit." Grant leveled the weapon toward the fleeing beast. At the same time, we saw the wolves bearing down on us from below. Reese stood between them and the rest of us, spear raised. "I got your back, rifleman." I felt Grant fight to control his breathing as he tracked the target through his scope. His mouth hung open slightly as he slowed his rapid heart rate as much as possible. The wolves were now far too close for comfort. An encounter was unavoidable. I heard Reese growl as he slammed a fist against his chest. "Come on, you bastards. Right here." Everything seemed to stop for a moment. Our pack stood on the hillside. The tip of a bloody spear faced the charging predators, while the frosted barrel of a gun faced the fleeing prey. As he squeezed the trigger, I felt the recoil pass through Grant's shoulder. 0.